Daniel Carter thought the worst humiliation of his life was being left by his wife with a small child and a mountain of debt. But standing in that ceremony hall, wearing a cheap suit, facing a billionaire woman in a wheelchair, he knew he had hit rock bottom. People whispered that he had sold his dignity for money. His family called it the only way out. But when the ceremony began, the bride suddenly stood up from her wheelchair and said something that left the entire room in stunned silence. So in the end, who was really being tested that day? 3 months before that wedding day, Daniel Carter sat in his kitchen staring at an eviction notice. The paper felt heavier than it should have. Around him, the apartment was quiet except for the hum of the old refrigerator and the occasional creak of floorboards. Lucas was asleep in the next room. Daniel had made sure of that before he opened the envelope. 38 years old, and he had nothing. The divorce had stripped him clean. His ex-wife had walked out 2 years ago with her new boyfriend, leaving Daniel with their son and a pile of debt she had helped create. The car was gone. The savings were gone. Even the wedding ring had been sold months ago to cover rent. What remained was a 7-year-old boy who still asked when his mother was coming back. Daniel folded the notice and set it on the table. He had 2 weeks to come up with $3,000, or they would be on the street. He had already borrowed from everyone he knew. His job at the warehouse barely covered food. There were no more options. He knew that. He had known it for weeks. The next morning, his mother called. She did not ask how he was doing. She never did anymore. Her voice was flat and direct, the way it always got when she talked about money. She told him to come to the house that afternoon. She said it was important. Daniel agreed because he did not have the energy to argue. When he arrived, his mother was waiting in the living room with his older brother, Tom. Tom worked in construction and had always been the one the family leaned on. He looked uncomfortable, which meant the conversation was not going to be pleasant. Their mother gestured for Daniel to sit down. He did. She got straight to it. There was a woman, a very wealthy woman. She lived outside the city in one of those estates that people only saw in magazines. Her name was Olivia Bennett. Daniel had never heard of her, but his mother said that did not matter. What mattered was that Olivia was looking for a husband. She was 35 years old, had never been married, and after a car accident a few years ago, she had been in a wheelchair. The family did not know much more than that. Olivia kept to herself. No press, no public appearances, just money and silence. Daniel stared at his mother. He asked if she was serious. She said she was. Tom shifted in his seat, but did not say anything. Their mother continued. The arrangement had been suggested through a mutual acquaintance. Olivia wanted someone stable, someone who would not run at the first sight of difficulty. Daniel fit the description. If he agreed to meet her, if things went well, he could marry her. The money would follow. Lucas would have a future. The debts would disappear. Daniel stood up. He told his mother no. He said he was not going to marry someone for money, especially not someone he did not know. He said it was humiliating. His mother did not raise her voice. She simply asked him what his plan was. She asked how he was going to keep Lucas in school. She asked if he thought pride paid rent. Daniel left without answering. He drove back to the apartment and tried to forget the conversation. But that night, Lucas came into the kitchen while Daniel was going through bills. The boy was holding a permission slip for a school field trip. It cost $40. Lucas asked if they could afford it. He said it was okay if they could not. He said he understood. Daniel looked at his son. Lucas was 7 years old and already learning to lower his expectations. The trip was to a science museum. Lucas loved science. He talked about astronauts and planets and how things worked. He deserved to go. He deserved more than this apartment and a father who could not afford $40. The next day, Daniel called his mother. He told her he would meet Olivia. His mother did not sound surprised. She gave him an address and a time. She told him to wear something presentable. Daniel hung up and sat in his car for a long time before driving home. The meeting was set for the following Saturday. Daniel borrowed a shirt from Tom and drove out to the estate. The house was massive. It sat behind iron gates and a long driveway lined with trees. Daniel had never been anywhere like it. He felt out of place before he even parked the car. A woman in her 50s answered the door. She introduced herself as Mrs. Lawson, Olivia's assistant. She led Daniel through a hallway with polished floors and paintings on the walls. Everything was clean and cold and expensive. They reached a sitting room where Olivia was waiting. She was in a wheelchair, just as his mother had said. Her hair was dark and pulled back. She wore a simple blouse and slacks. Her expression was unreadable. She gestured for Daniel to sit. He did. Mrs. Lawson left the room and closed the door behind her. Olivia did not waste time on small talk. She asked Daniel why he was there. He told her the truth. He said he needed money. He said he had a son and no way to provide for him. He'd said his family had arranged the meeting. Olivia listened without interrupting. When he finished, she asked if he expected her to feel sorry for him. Daniel said no. He said he did not expect anything. Olivia studied him for a moment. Then she asked if he understood what this arrangement was. She said she wasn't looking for love or companionship. She said she needed someone who would not leave when things became inconvenient. She said most men who approached her were interested in her money and nothing else. She wanted to see if Daniel was different. She did not say how. Daniel asked why she would choose him. Olivia said she had not chosen him yet. She said this was an interview. She asked if he was willing to go through with it. Daniel thought about Lucas. He thought about the eviction notice. He thought about the $40 field trip. He said yes. Olivia told him they would meet again in 2 weeks. She said she would let him know if she wanted to continue. Daniel nodded and left. On the drive home, he felt like he had sold something he could not get back. The second meeting was shorter. Olivia asked about Lucas. She asked about Daniel's marriage and why it had ended. She asked what he wanted for his son. Daniel answered honestly. He said he wanted Lucas to have opportunities. He said he wanted his son to grow up without the weight of poverty pressing down on him. Olivia did not react. She thanked him for coming and said she would be in touch. A week later, Mrs. Lawson called. Olivia had made her decision. She wanted to move forward. The wedding would be in 2 months. There would be a prenuptial agreement. Daniel would receive no money up front. If the marriage lasted, certain arrangements would be made for Lucas's education and their living situation. If it did not, Daniel would leave with nothing. Mrs. Lawson asked if he agreed. Daniel said yes. He told Lucas that night. The boy was confused. He asked if Daniel loved Olivia. Daniel said it was complicated. Lucas asked if they were going to live in the big house. Daniel said they might. Lucas seemed excited. That made it easier and harder at the same time. The family reacted differently. His mother was relieved. Tom was skeptical but supportive. A few cousins made jokes about Daniel landing on his feet. No one asked if he was okay. No one asked what it felt like to marry someone for survival. The weeks leading up to the wedding were strange. Olivia remained distant. She did not call or visit. All communication went through Mrs. Lawson. Daniel signed papers he barely understood. A lawyer explained the prenuptial agreement. It was clear. Daniel would have no claim to Olivia's assets unless specific conditions were met. He signed without hesitation. He had nothing to lose. Lucas asked more questions as the date approached. He wanted to know if Olivia liked dinosaurs. He wanted to know if she would read him bedtime stories. Daniel did not have answers. He told Lucas that Olivia was kind and that she wanted them to be happy. He did not know if that was true. The night before the wedding, Daniel could not sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling. He thought about his ex-wife and how she had looked at him with contempt before she left. He thought about the warehouse job and the eviction notice, and the $40 field trip. He thought about Olivia in her wheelchair, silent and unreachable. He wondered if she saw him the way everyone else did, as someone desperate, as someone who had run out of choices. When morning came, Daniel put on the cheap suit Tom had bought him. It fit poorly. The fabric was stiff and uncomfortable. He looked at himself in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. Lucas came into the room wearing his own small suit. The boy smiled. He said Daniel looked nice. Daniel did not feel nice. He felt like he was walking towards something he could not escape. The engagement announcement spread faster than Daniel had expected. His mother told a few relatives. Tom mentioned it to co-workers. Within days, everyone seemed to know. Daniel Carter, the man who could not keep his wife or provide much, was marrying a billionaire in a wheelchair. The reactions were immediate and predictable. His neighbor, Mrs. Brennan, stopped him in the hallway one evening. She was an older woman who had always been polite before. She looked at him with something close to pity and said she hoped he knew what he was doing. Her tone suggested she thought he did not. Daniel thanked her and kept walking. He heard her whisper to someone else as he unlocked his door. The words were clear enough. Desperate. Pathetic. Selling out. At the warehouse, things were worse. Daniel had worked there for almost a year. The job was not much, but it had been stable. His co-workers knew about the divorce and the debt. They had been sympathetic at first. But when word got out about the wedding, the sympathy disappeared. One of the guys, a man named Rick, cornered him during a lunch break. Rick leaned against the wall with his arms crossed and asked Daniel how it felt to give up. Daniel told Rick to mind his own business. Rick laughed and said it was everyone's business when someone gave up their dignity in public. A few other workers were listening. Some looked uncomfortable. Others nodded along. Rick said Daniel was setting a bad example. He said men were supposed to provide, not latch onto rich women. Daniel walked away. He did not trust himself to stay. The next week, someone left a printout on his locker. It was an article about men who married for money. Someone had circled a paragraph about self-respect and highlighted the word parasite. Daniel threw it in the trash. He did not tell anyone. What would be the point? Lucas was the only bright spot. The boy did not understand the whispers or the stares. He was excited about moving to a bigger house. He asked if they would have a yard. He asked if Olivia had a dog. Daniel answered as best he could. He tried to keep Lucas insulated from the ugliness, but kids heard things. One afternoon, Lucas came home from school quieter than usual. Daniel asked what was wrong. Lucas said a classmate had told him that Daniel was marrying someone because he could not take care of them by himself. Daniel felt his jaw tighten. He asked Lucas if he believed that. Lucas shook his head, but did not look convinced. Daniel knelt down so they were eye level. He told Lucas that sometimes adults made hard choices to protect the people they loved. He said it did not mean those choices were wrong. Lucas nodded slowly. He asked if Daniel loved Olivia. Daniel said he did not know her well enough yet. Lucas accepted that answer better than most adults would have. The family dinners were their own kind of trial. Daniel's mother hosted one a few weeks before the wedding. The whole family showed up. Cousins, aunts, uncles. They filled the small house with noise and opinions. Most of them had never cared much about Daniel's life before. Now they wanted details. They asked about Olivia's house. They asked how much money she had. They asked if Daniel had signed a prenup. He said yes. His cousin Janet laughed and said at least he was honest about why he was doing it. Tom was the only one who pulled Daniel aside. They stood in the backyard while everyone else ate inside. Tom lit a cigarette and offered one to Daniel. Daniel declined. Tom smoked in silence for a moment before speaking. He said he understood why Daniel was going through with it. He said he would probably do the same if he were in Daniel's position. But he also said it was going to be hard, harder than Daniel thought. People were not going to let him forget what this looked like. Daniel told Tom he had already figured that out. Tom nodded and flicked ash onto the grass. He said Daniel should make sure he knew what he was getting into with Olivia. He said rich people did not do things without a reason. If she was marrying Daniel, there was something she wanted. Daniel said he knew. Tom did not look reassured. Olivia remained distant throughout the engagement. Daniel saw her only twice after their second meeting. Both times were brief and formal. The first was to finalize details about the ceremony. Olivia sat in her wheelchair in the same sitting room where they had first met. Mrs. Lawson was present, taking notes. Olivia asked Daniel if he had any preferences for the wedding. He said no. She said the ceremony would be small and simple. Daniel agreed. She asked if Lucas would attend. Daniel said yes. Olivia nodded. That was the extent of the conversation. The second meeting was stranger. Olivia invited Daniel to the estate for dinner. He arrived expecting something intimate, a chance to talk without Mrs. Lawson or lawyers in the room. Instead, he found a table set for one. Olivia was not there. Mrs. Lawson explained that Olivia had been called away, but wanted Daniel to feel comfortable in the house. She said he should eat and explore if he wished. Daniel sat at the table alone and ate a meal that tasted like nothing. Afterward, he walked through a few rooms. Everything was pristine and empty. He left without seeing Olivia. Daniel began to wonder if she was testing him. He did not know what the test was or how to pass it. She gave him no reassurance, no promises beyond what had been written in the prenuptial agreement. The contract was clear. If Daniel left within the first year, he would receive nothing. If he stayed, Lucas's education would be covered, and they would have a place to live. Olivia's wealth would remain hers. Daniel would have no claim to it. He had signed because he had no leverage. But the lack of guarantees gnawed at him. What if she changed her mind? What if this was all some elaborate way to humiliate him? He tried to push the thoughts away. He focused on Lucas. He focused on getting through each day. But the doubt crept in during the quiet moments. Late at night, when Lucas was asleep and the apartment was silent, Daniel would sit at the kitchen table and wonder what he was doing. He wondered if Olivia saw him as a charity case. He wondered if she felt anything at all. 3 weeks before the wedding, the lawyer called. His name was Mr. Hayes, and he had been handling the prenuptial agreement. He asked Daniel to come to his office. Daniel assumed it was about paperwork. When he arrived, Mr. Hayes sat him down and pulled out a new document. He explained that Olivia's family had requested additional terms. They wanted assurances that Daniel would not attempt to contest the prenup or make financial claims in the event of a divorce. They wanted him to waive certain rights. Daniel read through the document. It was worse than the first agreement. He would have no access to Olivia's accounts, no input on financial decisions. If the marriage ended, he would leave with exactly what he had brought. Nothing. Mr. Boissor, Hayes asked if Daniel had any objections. Daniel looked at the lawyer and asked if Olivia had approved this. Mr. Hayes said it had come from her family, not from Olivia directly. But Olivia had not objected. Daniel signed. He did not hesitate. Mr. Hayes seemed surprised. He asked if Daniel wanted time to think it over. Daniel said no. He said he had already made his choice. If Olivia's family wanted to protect her money, that was their right. Daniel was not there to take anything. He was there because he had run out of options. Mr. Hayes slid the document into a folder and said he would file it. Daniel left the office feeling hollower than before. The final week before the wedding was the hardest. The whispers became louder. A few people stopped pretending to be polite. At the grocery store, a woman Daniel vaguely recognized from church made a comment loud enough for him to hear. She said it was a shame when men gave up on themselves. Her friend agreed. They walked past Daniel without looking at him. He finished his shopping and left. At home, Lucas asked why people kept staring at them. Daniel did not have a good answer. He told Lucas that sometimes people did not understand the choices others made. Lucas asked, if Daniel cared what they thought. Daniel said he tried not to, but he did. He cared more than he wanted to admit. The night before the wedding, Daniel sat with Lucas in the living room. They were packing the last of their things. Most of it would go into storage. Olivia had said they could bring whatever they needed to the estate. Daniel was not sure what that meant. He packed clothes for Lucas and a few books. He packed his own clothes and some photos. Everything else felt unnecessary. Lucas found an old picture of Daniel and his ex-wife. It had been taken years ago, before everything fell apart. They were smiling. Lucas held it up and asked if Daniel missed her. Daniel said no. Lucas asked if Daniel was scared about tomorrow. Daniel said yes. Lucas climbed into his lap and hugged him. He said it would be okay. Daniel held his son and tried to believe him. That night, after Lucas was asleep, Daniel stood in the bathroom and looked at himself in the mirror. He looked older than 38. The stress had carved lines into his face. His eyes were tired. He thought about the man he used to be, the man who had believed he could build a life through hard work and determination. That man was gone. What remained was someone willing to marry a stranger to keep his son fed. He thought about Olivia. He had spent 2 months preparing to marry her, and he still did not know her. She was cold and distant and unreadable. She had agreed to this arrangement for reasons Daniel did not understand. Maybe she pitied him. Maybe she was lonely. Maybe she had her own test in mind, and Daniel was just a variable in an equation he could not see. The wedding was set for 11 in the morning. Daniel did not sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the apartment. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed outside. Somewhere in the building, someone was watching television. Normal sounds, ordinary life. By tomorrow, none of this would be his anymore. Morning came slowly. Daniel got up and showered. He put on the cheap suit Tom had bought. It still fit poorly. He woke Lucas and helped him into his own suit. The boy was groggy but excited. He asked if they were really going to live in the big house. Daniel said yes. Lucas grinned. They drove to the venue in silence. Daniel's hands were steady on the wheel, but his mind was racing. He thought about all the ways this could go wrong. He thought about the prenuptial agreement and the cold distance in Olivia's eyes. He thought about the whispers and the stares and the labels people had given him. Failure. Desperate. Parasite. When they arrived, the ceremony space was already set up. It was small, just as Olivia had promised. A few rows of chairs, a simple altar. No flowers. No music. Daniel's mother and Tom were there. A handful of people Daniel did not recognize sat in the back. Mrs. Boyd Lawson stood near the entrance, checking something on a clipboard. She nodded at Daniel when he walked in. Olivia was already seated near the front. She wore a white dress that was understated, but elegant. Her wheelchair was positioned beside the first row. Her expression was calm, almost serene. She did not look at Daniel when he entered. He walked down the aisle with Lucas at his side. The boy waved at Olivia. She gave a slight nod in return. Daniel took his place at the altar. The officiant was a man in his 60s, with a kind face. He greeted Daniel quietly and opened a small book. The room fell silent. Daniel could feel every eye on him. His mother looked satisfied. Tom looked tense. The strangers in the back were whispering again. Daniel did not look at them. He kept his eyes forward. The officiant began to speak. He talked about commitment and partnership. The words felt distant, as if they were meant for someone else. Daniel stood still and waited. His chest was tight. His throat was dry. This was it. The moment everything changed. The officiant turned to Olivia and began to ask for her vows. And that was when she reached down, gripped the arms of her wheelchair, and stood up. The room went silent. Not the polite silence of a ceremony, but the kind that comes when something impossible happens. Olivia stood there in her white dress, her hands still resting on the arms of the wheelchair she no longer needed. She was steady, completely steady. There was no hesitation, no wobbling, no sign that she had spent months pretending otherwise. Daniel felt his breath catch. His mind could not process what he was seeing. The woman who had sat in that wheelchair at every meeting, who had been described to him as disabled, who had become the center of every whispered conversation about his desperation, was standing. She had always been able to stand. Behind him, someone gasped. Daniel heard his mother's voice, sharp and confused. Tom muttered something under his breath. Lucas tugged on Daniel's sleeve and asked what was happening. Daniel could not answer. He could not move. He could only stare at Olivia as she stepped away from the wheelchair and faced him fully. Her expression was calm, almost unreadable, but there was something in her eyes now, something that had not been there before. She looked at Daniel the way someone might look at a puzzle they had finally solved. The officiant stood frozen, his book still open in his hands. He looked between Olivia and Daniel, clearly unsure whether to continue. Olivia spoke first. Her voice was steady and clear, cutting through the silence like a blade. She said she owed everyone an explanation, but especially Daniel. She said she had never been disabled. The wheelchair had been a choice, a test. She let the words hang in the air for a moment before continuing. She said she had spent years being pursued by men who saw her money before they saw her, men who smiled and charmed and made promises they never intended to keep, men who would have married her for access to her accounts and walked away the moment it became convenient. She had learned not to trust intention. She had learned that people lied when they thought the reward was worth it. Olivia turned slightly so she was addressing the room, though her eyes kept returning to Daniel. She said the wheelchair had been a way to find out who someone really was. If a man was willing to marry her when he thought she had nothing to offer but money and difficulty, then maybe that man was different. Maybe that man was worth trusting. Daniel felt something twist inside him. Anger, humiliation, relief. He could not tell which was stronger. He had spent 2 months being judged by everyone around him. He had signed away every right, endured every whisper, and swallowed every insult because he thought he was doing what he had to do. And all of it had been a test, a performance. Olivia had been watching him the entire time, measuring him against some standard he had not known existed. She looked at him now and said she knew what people had been saying. She said she had heard the rumors, the accusations, the names people called him. She said she had let it happen because she needed to see how he would respond. She needed to know if he would run, if he would demand guarantees, if he would try to negotiate his way into her wealth before the wedding even happened. Daniel had done none of those things. He had signed the prenuptial agreement without complaint. He had accepted the additional terms her family had demanded. He had asked for nothing. And when the lawyer had offered him a chance to reconsider, he had refused. Olivia said that told her everything she needed to know. She said most men in his position would have found a way to secure something for themselves. They would have asked for money up front or insisted on better terms in the contract. They would have made it clear that their cooperation had a price. Daniel had not. He had walked into the arrangement with nothing and accepted that he might leave with nothing. That was rare. That was worth paying attention to. Daniel felt his hands clench at his sides. He wanted to speak, but the words would not come. He felt exposed, like every private moment of doubt and fear had been laid out for everyone to see. Olivia had orchestrated all of it. The distance, the silence, the cold formality. She had been testing him, and he had not even known. His mother stood up in the back. She looked furious. She said this was unacceptable, that Olivia had humiliated their family, that she had no right to play games with people's lives. Tom put a hand on her shoulder, trying to calm her, but she shook him off. She demanded to know what kind of person would do something like this. Olivia did not flinch. She said the kind of person who had been lied to, manipulated, and used. She said she had learned to protect herself the only way she knew how. If that made her cruel, then so be it. But she would not apologize for wanting to know the truth about someone before binding her life to theirs. Daniel finally found his voice. He said Olivia could have just asked. She could have been honest with him from the beginning. She could have spared him the humiliation of being called a parasite, and worse for 2 months. He said he had endured all of it because he thought he had no choice. Because he thought he was doing what was necessary for his son. Olivia met his eyes. She said that was exactly why he had passed the test, because he had not been doing it for himself. She said every other man who had come to her had been focused on what they could gain. Daniel had been focused on what he could provide. That distinction mattered. Daniel shook his head. He said it was easy for her to talk about tests and distinctions when she had all the power. She had money, security, control. He had nothing. He said she had put him in a position where his only option was to say yes, and then judged him for saying yes. He asked if she thought that was fair. Olivia did not answer right away. She looked at him for a long moment, and something shifted in her expression. It was not quite regret, but it was close. She said she knew it was not fair. She said fairness had not been her priority. Survival had. She had been trying to protect herself, and in doing so, she had made Daniel's life harder. She acknowledged that. But she also said she had needed to know. She asked him a question then, her voice quieter but no less direct. She asked if he had married her for the money, or because he had chosen to see the commitment through. She said she knew he had agreed because of his circumstances. She was not naive. But she wanted to know if at any point he had thought about what kind of man he wanted to be in the middle of all this. Daniel felt the anger drain out of him, replaced by something heavier. He thought about the nights he had spent awake, wondering if he was making the right choice. He thought about the moment he had signed the prenuptial agreement, and the feeling that he was giving up the last piece of himself. He thought about Lucas, asking if Daniel loved Olivia, and the answer he had not been able to give. He told Olivia the truth. He said he had agreed to marry her because he was desperate. He said he had needed a way to keep his son safe and fed and in school. He said he was not going to pretend otherwise. But he also said that once he had made the choice, he had committed to it. He had not tried to manipulate her or extract more from the arrangement than what had been offered. He had signed away his rights because he wanted to prove, at least to himself, that he was still capable of integrity, even when it cost him everything. He said he had not been trying to pass a test. He had just been trying to survive without losing himself completely. If that made him worthy in her eyes, then fine. But he wanted her to know that it had not been easy. It had not been noble. It had been painful and humiliating and harder than anything he had ever done. Olivia listened without interrupting. When he finished, she nodded slowly. She said she believed him. She said that was why she was standing there now, in front of everyone, telling the truth, because he deserved to know that his choice had mattered, that it had meant something. She said she had been watching him carefully for 2 months. She had seen how he treated Mrs. Lawson with respect, even when he was clearly uncomfortable. She had seen how he talked about Lucas, always putting his son first. She had seen him sign documents that stripped him of any financial security without a single complaint. She had seen him endure judgment and scorn and still show up. Olivia said she had met men who performed kindness when it benefited them. Daniel had shown consistency when no one was rewarding him for it. That was the difference. That was what she had been looking for. She turned to the officiant and said they could continue if Daniel was willing. She said the choice was his. She had made hers 2 months ago when she agreed to move forward. But if he wanted to walk away now, she would understand. She said she had put him through enough. Daniel looked at her. He looked at Lucas, who was still beside him, staring up with wide, confused eyes. He looked at Tom, who gave him a small nod, and at his mother, who looked like she did not know whether to be angry or relieved. He looked at the strangers in the back, the ones who had whispered about him, and he realized he did not care what they thought anymore. He looked back at Olivia and said he wasn't walking away. He said he had made a commitment, and he was going to keep it. Not because she had money. Not because he had passed some test, but because he had chosen this path, and he was going to see it through. He said he was tired of running from hard things. He was tired of feeling like he had no control. This was one thing he could control, his word, his choice. Olivia's expression softened. It was the first time Daniel had seen her look anything other than guarded. She said that was all she had wanted to know. She extended her hand toward him, and after a moment, he took it. Her grip was firm and warm. She said they would figure the rest out together. The officiant cleared his throat and asked if they were ready to continue. Olivia said yes. Daniel nodded. The officiant resumed the ceremony, though his voice was shaky. He went through the vows quickly, as if afraid someone might interrupt again. When he pronounced them married, there was no applause, just a heavy, uncertain silence. Daniel and Olivia stood together at the altar. She had let go of his hand, but she had not stepped away. Lucas came closer and looked at Olivia, then asked if she was okay. She smiled at the boy, a real smile, and said she was. Lucas seemed satisfied with that. Daniel's mother approached, still looking unsettled. She said she did not know what to think about all this. Olivia said she understood. She said she hoped in time they could move past it. Daniel's mother did not respond. She just took Lucas by the hand and led him toward the back of the room. Tom clapped Daniel on the shoulder and said he would call later. Then he followed their mother out. The strangers in the back filed out quietly, their whispers now turned inward. Daniel and Olivia were left alone in the room with Mrs. Lawson, who was folding up the wheelchair with a neutral expression. She did not seem surprised by any of this. Daniel wondered if she had known all along. Olivia turned to him and said they should talk. Not now, but soon. She said there were things they needed to figure out, boundaries to set, expectations to clarify. She said this marriage was real, but it did not have to look like anyone else's. They would define it themselves. Daniel agreed. He said that sounded fair. Olivia smiled again, that same small, genuine smile. She said she thought they might actually be able to make this work. Daniel said he hoped so, because he had nothing left to fall back on. This was it. They walked out of the ceremony hall together. The wheelchair stayed behind, folded and forgotten. Outside, the sunlight was harsh and bright. Daniel squinted against it and thought about everything that had just happened. He had been tested without knowing it. He had been judged and measured and found acceptable. He did not know how to feel about that. But as he stood there, with Olivia beside him and Lucas waiting by the car, he realized something. He had not lost himself. He had made a choice under impossible circumstances, and he had stuck to it. That had to count for something. Maybe it counted for everything. Olivia looked at him and asked if he was ready. Daniel said he was. They got into the car and drove toward the estate, toward whatever came next. The value of a person, Daniel thought, was not in what they had or did not have. It was in how they stood when there was nothing left to lean on.